He says that Manitowoc officers stayed within arm's length the whole time, but at least one other officer testified otherwise. He remembers that they seized the handcuffs and the leg irons, but not the guns. This is Sergeant Andrew Colborn's testimony. And in episode 29, we keep digging. Welcome back to Beach House 34. I'm Christine Worth, and this is episode 29 of the full trial reading of the Avery Trial. Last episode, we started kind of unpacking Sergeant Colburn's testimony, and specifically what happened on November 5th, 2005, when Teresa Halbach was still listed as just a missing person. And yet, Manitowoc officers were already seizing items from Steven Avery's trailer as if they were working a murder scene. We talked about the guns that were left behind, the handcuffs, and the shackles that were taken. And today, we continue with Colburn's testimony. So let's get into it. Real quick, before we start, I know a lot of you come back each episode, but only a small percent are actually subscribed. If that's you, hit that subscribe button to stay up to date on all new releases. It helps more than you know. When we left off in the last episode, the jury had been dismissed for lunch, and everybody left for lunch, and now they're all back in the courtroom. Sergeant Colborn retakes the stand, and the direct examination is continued by Attorney Kratz. Sergeant Colborn, we left off with the next day, I believe, of your involvement with on Monday, the 7th of November. Do you remember that day? Yes, sir. Were you asked to return to the Avery property? Yes, I was. And by the way, who were you asked to return there by? The Calumet County Sheriff's Office or Department of Criminal Investigation, one of those officers. If you could speak up just a little bit, Sergeant, I would appreciate it. I was either asked to return by the Calumet County Sheriff's Department, one of their supervisors, or by the Department of Corrections, or Department of Criminal Investigations, Agent Tom Fassbender. Were you, for lack of a better word, volunteering for this service or these duties? No. On the 7th of November, then, do you recall about what time you returned to the salvage yard? Somewhere between 6:30 in the morning and 7:30 in the morning, I believe. Sergeant Colborn, what were you asked to do on the 7th, if you recall? On Monday, I was informed that by Sergeant Tyson that I would be working with him again. This would be the same Sergeant Tyson that I had worked with on Saturday, and he informed us that our assignment that day was to go into the Avery salvage yard and open any trunks of vehicles that had not yet been searched, because the trunks, apparently, they couldn't find the keys for these vehicles, and we were to look inside the trunks of these vehicles. Were there any other members of your team other than you and Sergeant Tyson? Also, Lieutenant Lenk was with me that day. And did you, in fact, assist in opening up or searching trunks that hadn't yet been opened? Yes, I did. What else happened on the 7th? That took the better part of the morning. I believe in the afternoon, we were instructed to start collecting, specifically instructed to collect. I take that back. At some point, we were also asked to get I believe this was the day that we were asked to get the serial number off Steven Avery's computer. Did you assist Sergeant Tyson in that regard? Yes, I did. Can you tell the jury what you did, please? The serial number is on the back of the computer, and the portion of the computer that we needed, the serial number, was underneath a desk that had been shown earlier, the photograph that was shown earlier. So I crawled underneath the desk and used a flashlight to obtain the manufacturer and the serial number of the computer, which Sergeant Tyson wrote down. All right. How long did that process take? At the most, 10 minutes. Did you go in any other part of the residence, or did you confine yourself to the living room area? I just confined myself to the area where the computer was that day. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? I just confined myself to the area. Of course, he probably can't speak to others. I don't know. But he specifically says, excuse me, I just confined myself. And I also want to note that as I began this, began this, that his responses have become now pretty choppy. Even as I read them, there are interruptions in between, like what he's saying, and I'm reading verbatim, like as he's responding. So let's go ahead and continue. What else did you do then? I believe then we were instructed to, I believe we were instructed then to start collecting some firearms from the other residences that were on the Avery property. I believe specifically Barb Janda's residence. And did you do that? Yes, sir. All right. What was the next thing you did on the 7th? I know at one point I was asked to take some photographs, I believe, of a burning barrel that was on Steve Avery's property. I did do that. Which burn barrel did you take photographs of? It was a burn barrel that was that was in close proximity to Steve's trailer, and I remember it had a car wheel by it. To orient us to that, there's an exhibit which has been received. It's Exhibit 114. It's, again, an exterior computer animation. If you take your laser pointer up there, tell us what we're looking at and what burn barrel you were asked to examine and photograph. That burn barrel right there. I remember right on one, either this side or this side of it, there was a car wheel standing on its edge with a tire missing. Did it appear to you, at least as you went to that scene and as you look at Exhibit 114, who that burn barrel is attached to? Yes, it's the burn barrel for that residence right there, Steve Avery's residence. Now, Sergeant, you talked about some different kinds of photography. I think you talked about digital as well as 35 millimeter photography. Do you remember that day, the 7th of November, what kind of photography you were performing? A 35 millimeter, I did not do any digital photography the entire time I was out there personally. That way, you talked about a wheel next to the burn barrel. I'm going to show you what's been marked as exhibit number 158. In fact, Mr. Fallon is going to hand it to you, but I would ask you if you could tell us what this is an image of. That is a car wheel that's at the very edge of Steve Avery's burn barrel. And those wires, I believe, that are around the wheel are actually part of the makeup of the tire, probably like portions of the steel belt. As we get closer, do a little bit of a close-up. Can you see that better now on the screen? Yes, sir. By the way, Exhibit 158, is that a photo that you took or likely took? Yes, sir. Attorney Kratz then says, in all honesty, Judge, so that I don't forget, I'm going to move the admission of Exhibit 158 at this time. The court says, any objection? Attorney Strang says, none. The court then says 158 is received. And he continues. Were you asked to do anything else on the 7th, Sergeant? I believe I was also. At some point, apparently the command post received word that some searchers had located an area that it looked suspicious. There was a plastic poking up from the ground, and it looked like the ground had been disturbed. So I was asked to go to that area along with the Wisconsin State Crime Lab, Sergeant Tyson, and Lieutenant Lenk, and help the crime lab, if they requested it, to excavate that area. Do you know on what roadway this was? I believe it was off Cuss White Cedar Road. This is something that Mr. Ertl yesterday talked about, a potential burial site, but what wasn't? Was that your understanding that it turned out not to be? Yes, it turned out to be nothing. Did you do anything else on the 7th? I think by the time we were done with that, that consumed the rest of the day. Let's move on then to the 8th, which would be Tuesday, the 8th of November. Were you asked to return to the property? Yes, sir. Again, who were you asked to return there by? By, no, I didn't get the wasn't told to me directly. Usually, Lieutenant Lenk met with members of the Calumet County Sheriff's Department and Department of Criminal Investigations at the completion of each day. And then I would just check with Lieutenant Lenk, are we needed tomorrow or no? I see. And then he said, we're needed tomorrow. Did you show up then on the 8th? Yes, sir. And who were you attached to, or who were you assigned to that day? I was assigned to Deputy Dan Kucharski from the Calumet County Sheriff's Department. Do you know what you were asked to do on the 8th? Yes, Deputy Kucharski, Lieutenant Lenk, and myself were instructed by Special Agent Fassbender to look for some specific printed material inside Steven Avery's residence. Okay, and to collect same. Did you have occasion to enter Steven Avery's bedroom on the 8th of November? Yes, sir. Who did you enter that bedroom with? Deputy Kucharski and Lieutenant Lenk. How long did you spend in that bedroom on the 8th, if you recall? An hour or so. Good Lord, seriously? An hour in that tiny, tiny bedroom? What the hell were they doing? Let's continue. Sorry. Again, this is real-time reaction. I have never read any of these. Okay. Were you directed to perform any search of that trailer, specifically of that bedroom? Before we started on the bedroom, I was instructed to, with Deputy Kucharski, to remove the computer and to wait until the computer was picked up by another law enforcement officer. Okay, did you do that? Yes, sir. Then moving to the bedroom, my question is whether you were to perform a search that day. Yes, sir. Okay, so wait a minute. So the way that I understand this was that there were 3 of them in the bedroom, or they all went and they spent this 1 hour in the bedroom, or 3 of them walked into the trailer, right? But then he was instructed, and he wasn't asked by who, but he said, I was instructed to, along with Deputy Kucharski, to remove the computer and wait until the computer was picked up by another law enforcement officer. So where was Lieutenant Lenk as they were waiting for this to be picked up by another law enforcement officer? That's my question. Hopefully the defense gets into that, or maybe even the prosecution will address that. I don't know. Let's continue. I'm showing you what's been marked for identification as exhibit number 208. Can you tell us what that is, please? These are photographs of a cabinet that's right next to the desk in Steve Avery's bedroom. That would be the same bedroom where the firearms were that I described before, and we're just talking about the first one now, exhibit 208. That's this photograph here. It's a picture of, this is a desk. I'm actually going to put a view up for the jury so that we can, okay, if you want to use your laser pointer where everybody can see what you are talking about then. This is a desk. There's an open area. That's the picture. This is a cabinet. You can see how closely it is positioned to the desk there. Let me just stop you. Is this something that you earlier called a bookcase? This cabinet, I'm sorry, yes, I called it a bookcase, and that's actually, I guess, what it is, a bookcase. Just so the jury understands, was this the item from which the handcuffs and the leg irons were seized a couple days earlier? Yes, sir. It's easier to see now with this picture. The leg irons and handcuffs were located in this area here. Now, this particular photograph, you can see a pair of slippers, bedroom slippers, next to it. Is that right? Yes, sir. You can see a electrical outlet or a socket. Is that right? Yes, sir. Can you point to that, please? Were you asked, or at least as part of your responsibilities of searching the bedroom, were you asked to do a thorough search of this piece of furniture? Yes. And did you do that? Yes. In performing that search, Sergeant Colborn, did you move or manipulate this piece of furniture at all? Yes, sir. Can you describe that for the jury, please? As I stated before, we were looking for specific printed or photographs. There is a narrow area between this bookcase and this desk right there. And in order to make sure that there was no evidence or anything else that we needed lodged between there, I actually tipped this to the side and twisted it away from the wall. If you can describe that further, I don't know if you can do it with your words or show us with your hands. How did you do it? I will be the first to admit I wasn't any too gentle, as we were, getting exasperated. I handled it rather roughly, twisting it, shaking it, pulling it. And that's the bookcase that you are talking about? Yes, this piece of furniture right here, a bookcase. I'm sorry. Sergeant, in shaking and twisting that particular bookcase, did you pull it away from the wall itself so that you can see behind there? Yes, I did. After that process was complete, were the items, the binder that we can see in the lower left-hand corner of the bookcase, can you point to that, please? Was that and the other items within that bookcase removed and examined by yourself and your other members of your team? Yes, sir. Did you have occasion to replace those items into that bookcase after having pulled it from the wall? Yes, sir. Was that done with the bookcase after that thorough search of those materials was completed? The items that we didn't use or collect as evidence, that binder and some of the other things that were kind of stuffed rather forcefully back in there. And other items that we were going to collect as evidence we had so many that we didn't have a container in the room large enough to hold them all. So Lieutenant Lenk exited the bedroom to get a larger container, and I began to search this desk here. By a larger container, what are you talking about? A box. Now, at this time, that is, as the search was completed, what was done with that piece of furniture? What was done with the bookcase itself? It was still kind of away from the wall, but it was more or less stuffed back into its original position. The next exhibit, exhibit number 209, describe what that is, please. That's just a different photograph of the same bookcase. I'm going to allow the jury to see that as well. Is this the photo that you are talking about of the bookcase? Yes, sir. The next exhibit, number 210, can you describe what that is for us, please? 210 is a picture, a photograph of well, you can see that we have some materials there stuffed in a bag. Then there's the bedroom slippers, and now there is a key with a fob lying between the bedroom slippers. Sergeant Colborn, I'm going to direct your attention then to the large screen. I would like you to carefully take the laser pointer and describe for the jury what it is that we're looking at. These were some items that we had bagged up. I don't recall what that is. These were the same bedroom slippers that were in the other photograph, but you can see that they have been jostled. That's the electrical outlet. And now there is a key with this connecting canvas or nylon fob and a black plastic buckle lying on the floor. The piece of furniture that is the bookcase that we see in Exhibit 210, has that been removed or replaced to its original position? I can't say we have got it exactly 100% where it was, but it's very close to its original position. Yes. So the jury understands the timing of these. Exhibit number 208 shows the slippers right next to the outlet, and this exhibit 210 shows the slippers pushed to what would be the left and actually a little bit closer to the photographer. Is that fair? That's correct. Do you recognize this image? That is, did you see this image on the 8th of November? Yes. Can you describe that moment or that event for the jury, please? As I had mentioned earlier, Lieutenant Lenk had exited. That is the door coming into the bedroom. He had gone through that door to get a bigger container. I was searching the desk here. Deputy Kucharski was sitting on the bed, which also isn't in the photograph, but is in very close proximity to this piece of furniture, the bookcase, filling out paperwork. Lieutenant Lenk got about right here. His feet would have been right here, so he was in the room and said something to the effect of, "There's a key on the floor here," or "Look, there's a key." I don't know what his exact verbiage was, but he identified that there was a key on the floor. I turned around as I wasn't very far away. I turned around and looked, and I observed this key lying right where it is. And I observed this key had this black rubberized or plastic end on it, which they didn't, that's a newer model car key due to that plastic or rubberized end. And I also observed that embossed on there was a Toyota emblem. And we told Deputy Kucharski, get a photograph of this right away, which he did, which is this photograph. I did not take this photograph. By the way, as you and Deputy Kucharski and Lieutenant Lenk observed this, did any of the three of you approach or touch this piece of evidence at that time? I may have been standing in this area here. This piece of furniture is only 2.5, 3 feet tall, maybe. So I could easily see over it to see the key. I did not approach the key. Lieutenant Lenk did not come into the room. Deputy Kucharski photographed the key from whatever angle this picture was taken at. That's as close as we got. My question again was, did either yourself, Lieutenant Lenk, or Deputy Kucharski, prior to this photo was taken, touch that key? No, sir. Why not? I think all three of us knew at the same time that there was a very good chance, seeing a Toyota emblem embossed on that key, knowing that Teresa Halbach's vehicle was a Toyota, and this was a very important piece of evidence. And, none of us were going to taint that. Let me ask you, Sergeant Colborn, you guys, you specifically, Lieutenant Lenk and now Deputy Kucharski, had been in this room for quite some time before this key appears in this position. Isn't that right? Yes, sir. Did this surprise you that you saw this key there? Yes, I was very surprised. Did the three of you talk about that? We hadn't seen it before, anything like that? I believe I said to myself, damn, how did I miss that? Now, other than the bedroom slippers being pushed to the side, had anything else changed other than the pulling out and the twisting and the jostling of the cabinet? As we looked at the cabinet, it appeared that in the process of us stuffing everything back into the cabinet, we had separated the back of the cabinet, the small piece of paneling that would be the back of the cabinet, from the frame of the cabinet itself. Ooh, I'm going to stop here because in a previous episode, I can't recall off the top of my head what that was, I did mention actually seeing this cabinet. They have a photo. There's a photo on YouTube if you watch this on YouTube. And as I mentioned, it's a very, very old cabinet. I mean, it's been around. It's seen some days. And the back of it, where it had become detached, it didn't look as if the detachment itself was new, or at least the portions that you can see in the photo. I mean, it looks like it had been, how do I phrase this? If you buy a piece of furniture, some of the cheap furniture that you can just put together yourself and it has that paneling on the back of it. This is kind of similar to that. And if those get shoved out, you can actually see like the threads of the plywood or whatever that is in the back. Kind of, there's shards of it, or it looks new, right? The edges are sharp. You could tell it's like a brand new hole or it just got torn out. But in this image, or at least the one that I can see, the edges of these where it's separated, they're very dull, as if it had been that way for a very long time. So anyway, let's continue. Let me stop you there. Did you have occasion then to go look at the back of this piece of furniture, the back of the cabinet, after this key was processed? Yes. I know I'm jumping ahead just a little bit, but could you describe what you saw? Could you describe the back panel of the cabinet? It would be made out of, I'm trying to think of the right word, like a piece of wood, the same thickness maybe as a piece of paneling that one would put on a wall. It's a thin piece of wood. It's not like it's a 1/4-inch piece of plywood nailed to the back of the cabinet. It's a thin piece of wood. The piece of furniture itself is old and not in the best state of repair. And I believe it was just very small, short brads or nails that held the piece of paneling or the piece of wood to the back of the cabinet. And I'm sure that when we were putting things in, we exercised more than enough force to push it away. And there was a gap now between the back of the piece of paneling on the back of the cabinet and the frame of the cabinet itself. I'm going to show you an exhibit that's been received as exhibit number 169, although taken on a different day. We're all in agreement about that. Does exhibit 169 look the same as when you witnessed the back of this cabinet on the 8th of November? Yes, sir. What was done with the key, if you remember? Initially, it was photographed, and Lieutenant Lenk and I both, when I say told, it was not like we were ordering him, but we just communicated to Deputy Kucharski that he needed to make sure he put on a fresh set of gloves, pick up that key, put it in a separate container totally by itself, and we needed to contact the command post right away and let them know that we had located a key that could possibly be a key to Teresa's vehicle. Did somebody from the command post come to your location then? Two people from the command post came to our location, Special Agent Fassbender and Investigator Wiegert. Were you present when the lead investigators were shown this key that was discovered? Yes. We packaged the key and we went into the living room, and that's where we remained until the two investigators came and looked at the key. Attorney Kratz says, "What exhibit number is next, Madam Clerk?" The clerk says 211. And then Attorney Kratz continues, "Sergeant Colborn." And then Attorney Kratz says, "And Judge, the record should reflect that the evidence bag is being opened with the assistance of Investigator Wiegert." For those of you who want to get ahead in the trial and you don't want to have to wait, you can become a member of the Beach House 34 YouTube channel and get access to episodes as soon as they're released, along with some extra recordings that won't be available to the general public. It costs less per month than it does for one latte at Starbucks. I'll have the link in the show notes. And then Attorney Kratz continues, "But Sergeant Colborn, you are going to be shown the contents of what is being marked as exhibit number 211. And Attorney Kratz says, "Deputy Wiegert, if you would be so kind as to show it to this witness." And then Attorney Kratz continues, "Sergeant Colborn, please don't touch this exhibit, but an exhibit that has now been marked for identification as exhibit 211 is being shown to you." Attorney Kratz then says, "If you stand to the side a little bit, Investigator Wiegert, I would appreciate it." And then he continues, "Tell the jury what that is, please." That appears to be the exact same key as pictured right there on that photograph. It's a long key with a black plastic end with a Toyota emblem on the end of it. And that same nylon actually, I think, corresponds to something that someone would wear around their neck and clip to the other plastic end. Attorney Kratz says, "With permission, Judge, may Investigator Wiegert post it or at least show the jurors." The court says, "Any objection?" Attorney Strang says, "No." The court then says, "Yes, you may do so." And Attorney Kratz then says, "Hold it up by one end, investigator, and show the jurors, please." The court says, "The record should probably also reflect he's wearing rubber gloves at this time, or unless you can describe them more accurately." Attorney Kratz then says, "Latex gloves. And although Mr. Kucharski will be testifying as well, Judge, I don't believe there is any contest as to this exhibit, and I will move its admission at this time." The court says, "Any objection?" Attorney Strang says, "Well, there's plenty of contest as to that exhibit, but not as to it having been authenticated and identified, and I don't have any objection to it being received." Attorney Kratz says, "Thank you." The court says, "All right, the exhibit will be received." Attorney Kratz says, "Thank you." And then he continues, "After Special Agent Fassbender and Investigator Wiegert were shown that key, do you know what happened to that key?" We decided between the three of us just to wait in the living room. Special Agent Fassbender and Investigator Wiegert said that another law enforcement officer would be coming down to take possession of the key. So we all three just waited until he got there. We turned the key over, and I believe we were told that it would be going to Madison, to the crime lab where Teresa's vehicle already was. Sergeant Colborn, after this thorough search of Mr. Avery's residence was completed, were you asked to perform a similar thorough search of somebody else's residence that day? Yes, I believe it was Charles Avery's residence. And was that search performed by the same team? That is yourself, Lieutenant Lenk, and Deputy Kucharski from Calumet County. Yes, sir. Sergeant Colborn, we have heard some references this week and even last to your involvement in this case. And now that you are here, now that you are in court, I have some questions regarding your knowledge of Mr. Avery. First of all, prior to November of 2005, had you been involved at all in the investigation, testifying against, or prosecution of Steven Avery in any previous criminal proceedings? No, sir. Had you ever been personally named in any civil lawsuits or ever personally been accused of any wrongdoing regarding Mr. Steven Avery? No, sir. You were asked, as I understand, as part of a civil lawsuit, to provide what's called a deposition, to be questioned by some lawyers. Is that right? Yes, sir. Do you recall when that occurred? I believe it was in October of 2005. Do you remember how long that deposition, how long that process took? I thought it was less than an hour, but an hour or less. All right. You were asked some questions. Is that right? Under oath? Yes, sir. Did you answer those questions to the best of your knowledge and ability? Yes, I did. Do you recall the context in which you were asked those questions? In other words, do you recall what you were asked about? Yes, sir. Can you tell the jury what you were asked about? In 1994 or 95, I had received a telephone call when I was working as my capacity as a corrections officer in the Manitowoc County Jail. Telephone call was from somebody who identified himself as a detective, and I answered the phone, Manitowoc County Jail Officer Colborn. Apparently, this person's assumption was that I was a police officer, not a corrections officer, and began telling me that he had received information that somebody who had committed an assault in Manitowoc County was in their custody, and we may have somebody in our jail on that assault charge that may not have done it. I told this individual, you are probably going to want to speak to a detective, and I transferred the call to a detective, to the detective division at the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department. That's the extent of my testimony. That's it? That's your connection to Mr. Avery? Yes, sir. Well, did that cause you enough embarrassment and enough angst in which to set up Mr. Avery for a charge of murder? No. Did that deposition cause you such problems from within your department that you obtained and planted blood so that it would be found and Mr. Avery would be wrongfully accused of a homicide case? No, sir. Have you ever planted any evidence against Mr. Avery? That's ridiculous. No, I have not. Have you ever planted any evidence against anybody in the course of your law enforcement career? I have to say that this is the first time my integrity has ever been questioned, and no, I have not. Attorney Kratz says, that's all I have for Sergeant Colborn, Judge. And the court then says, Mr. Strang. And Steven's defense attorney begins his cross-examination. This is the first time your integrity has been questioned? As it applies to being a police officer, yes. Okay. And it's not the first time Mr. Avery's has been, so I have some questions for you. You were, in November of 2005, in the Road Patrol Division of the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department? Yes, sir. You were a sergeant in that division? Yes, sir. Were there other sergeants in that division? Yes, sir. How many? There's 1 lieutenant and 2 sergeants assigned per shift. There's 3 shifts. We're looking at 6 sergeants, 3 lieutenants. Your shift particularly was noon to 8 p.m.? Yes, sir. That made you the assistant shift commander as opposed to the other sergeant? Yes, sir. And the shift commander himself, when the lieutenant had a day off? Yes, sir. The Road Patrol Division does exactly that. It patrols the roads of Manitowoc County? Yes, sir. Typically in marked squad cars? Yes, sir. Speeding and other traffic law enforcement? Yes, sir. Calls for help from citizens, a variety of calls. Yes, sir. You might be the first to respond to a domestic violence call, let's say. Yes, sir. You might respond to a flat tire on the side of the road. Yes, sir. This division during the noon to 8 shift back in, let's say, November 2005, had approximately how many officers out on the road during that noon to 8 shift? Well, I believe that part 4 or 5 officers counting the shift commander. Roughly? Yes, sir. I understand. And the shift commander had some administrative duties, but also had some road patrol duties? Yes, sir. Collection of evidence was not typically a duty of the road patrol division? Yes, it is. That is, some members of the road patrol division may be trained in the collection of evidence. Correct? Correct. Just as some members of the other divisions of the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department may have special training as evidence technicians or in evidence collection. Correct. The Sheriff's Department includes, as one of its divisions or bureaus, units, if you will, an investigative unit? Yes, sir. To make it easier, both patrol and investigations are assigned to the Operations Division of the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department. Very well, thank you. But they are separate units within the Operations Division? Yes, sir. You had been trained in evidence collection as a technician? Yes, sir. That went back to, I think, 1997? Yes, sir. That was something for which you volunteered? Yes. You were accepted or someone accepted your offer and you got some special training? Yes, sir. One of the people from whom you got that special training is seated right over there, second to my right in the back. True? Evidence tech training? Yes. No, sir. Didn't get that kind of training from Special Agent Fassbender? No, I did not. What training did you get from Special Agent Fassbender? I'm talking about well before November 2005 now. Special Agent Fassbender was my DAT, which is Defense and Arrest Tactics instructor, during the Recruit Academy at Fox Valley Tech. All right. Having nothing directly to do with evidence collection? That's correct, sir. But you went through a recruit academy? Yes, sir. As do all police recruits or candidate officers? Yes, sir. How long did that academy last? It was 400 hours when I went through the academy. 10 weeks, roughly. Roughly 10 weeks full-time? Yes, sir. All right. We'll come back to that a little bit later in a different context. Did you have any training as an evidence technician from Lieutenant James Lenk? Yes. He, to be a lieutenant in charge of the detective unit within the operations division? Yes, sir. Are there more than one lieutenant in the detective unit? No, sir. So he's the chief detective, in fact, of Manitowoc County? Yes, sir. Within the sheriff's department, he was involved in training you as an evidence technician? I am not exactly sure how to answer that without elaborating somewhat. Well, let's start with a yes or a no. Yes, he has given me training material during the course of my career. Okay. And has he given you anything more formal than that? In other words, I'm going to let you elaborate here, but we'll do this in a question and answer format. Lieutenant Lenk personally hasn't trained me on any specific issue. We would have semi-annual or sometimes quarterly meetings of all the evidence techs where Lieutenant Lenk might present some new information or somebody who had recently gone to training might present some new information. But Lieutenant Lenk never took me one-on-one and trained me in any sort of specific application of being an evidence technician. But you have sort of in-house, in-service programs, yes, sir, if you will, sharing information on new techniques or new teaching? Yes, sir. Sometimes that comes from Lieutenant Lenk? Yes, sir. Other times he may simply be involved in overseeing the meeting? Yes, sir. You have known Lieutenant Lenk personally how long? Since 1996, so 10, 11 years. Was it 96 that you actually became a sworn officer? Yes, sir. And if I understand you, the period as a corrections officer in the Manitowoc County Jail was 92 to 94? 92 to 96. I'm sorry, then I misunderstood you. You went directly from the jail to the recruit academy and then as a sworn officer? Yes, sir. It was 1996 then when you joined the department as a sworn officer that you met the man who is now Lieutenant Lenk? Yes, sir. He at that time was also in the road unit or the road patrol unit? Yes, sir. You became friendly with Lieutenant Lenk? Yes. Let's call him James Lenk and not worry about his rank at any given time. All right? Do you call him Jim? Yes, I do. You worked closely with him for several years? Yes, I have worked with him several times. He is one of the people in the department to whom you feel personally close? We don't do anything together socially, but I feel he is an experienced officer. And if I have a investigative type question, I feel comfortable talking with him about it. All right. And the time came in 2005 or 2006 when you decided that you aspired to some rank higher than sergeant within the department. True? I'm sorry, could you repeat? The time came in 2005 or perhaps 2006, I don't know when, but at some point, certainly before the elections in 2006, you began to aspire to a rank higher than sergeant in your department? Yes. You decided to run for sheriff? That's correct. Of Manitowoc County? That is correct. Another officer within the department at the same time also was running for sheriff in the same 2006 election? Yes. That created a situation in which two officers from the same department were running against each other? Yes. There was some tension, at least in that situation. Are you talking about in 2006, last summer? Well, whenever the campaign began to heat up. I don't really think the campaign ever got heated, but I didn't really feel any tension. Okay. But one of the things you both were interested in doing, and the other gentleman is a man named Robert Herman, correct? Yes. The brother of Todd Herman? Yes. One of the things that you and Robert Herman both did was sort of see who would support you and who might support the other fellow in race for sheriff? No? Weren't interested who was on your side? No, I wasn't. Do you know whether Lieutenant Lenk was on your side? I have no idea how Lieutenant Lenk voted during the sheriff's campaign. I would hope that he supported me, but it wouldn't change my feeling one iota if he didn't. I understand that. But how long was it between the time you declared your candidacy publicly and the time of the election? I thought we had to have our nomination papers filed in May of 2006, and the election was in November of 2006. Okay, so let's call it 5, 6 months roughly. I'm just trying to get a rough time frame here, okay? Lieutenant Link's working hours, to overlap in part with your own on the days you are both at work? Yes. That is, he would typically work something like an 8 to 5 kind of shift. I'm not sure what his duty hours are, but somewhere in that time frame. In other words, in that afternoon, you two would be on duty at the same time? Yes, sir. And in all that time, he never approached you and gave you an attaboy or told you he was in his corner, in your corner, or that he couldn't be? Nothing? Attorney Kratz says, Judge, I'm going to object as irrelevant. Is this sometime after November of 2005? Attorney Strang says it is. Attorney Kratz says, I can't see the relevance then to what happened at the Avery salvage property. I will interpose that objection then. The court says, Mr. Strang. Attorney Strang says, well, I'm happy to be heard out of the presence if the court wishes that. And the court says, all right, I think what I will do at this time is excuse the jury for a few minutes. Attorney Strang then says, we can excuse the witness as well. The court says, Mr. Colborn, you are excused as well. And this is interesting. So at this point, the jury is not present, the witness is not present, and the court then says, Mr. Strang. And Attorney Strang says, this isn't a long line of inquiry, Your Honor, but clearly this is relevant to Sergeant Colburn's bias or potential for bias here. Lieutenant Lenk was his partner through several days of searching. Consistently, as the testimony has shown, they were paired together, usually with Detective Remacher as well. Together, they were deposed within 48 hours in Steven Avery's lawsuit. I expect to elicit testimony that they discussed their depositions. Now, together, it is the two of them who, in Sergeant Colborn's words, had their integrity questioned. Whether these two stood together and had each other's back during a race for a higher office, that well could have been affected by the lawsuit that Steven Avery had filed. By further developments in that lawsuit, I think is directly relevant to this witness's credibility and bias. The court says, Mr. Kratz. Attorney Kratz then says, we're talking about two different things, Judge. Testimonial bias, which would be today, and is this witness prepared to shade his testimony to the benefit that perhaps of Lieutenant Lenk or somebody like that? Mr. Strang's area of inquiry is appropriate if, in fact, the court finds that to be relevant. However, what Mr. Strang is really talking about is having each other's back or motive, or being in partnership, for lack of a better term, in planting evidence or being involved in criminal behavior and activity. Then that only becomes relevant if they had this connection, if they had this friendship or this bond before November of 2005. So if that is in fact the dual purpose of this, then I would ask Mr. Strang to confine his bias inquiry, at least as it regards Lieutenant Lenk and the election, and to that which might affect his testimony today. It would have no relevance as to what occurred in November of 2005. The court then says, how do you propose that that be conveyed to the jury? What the purpose of his questioning is. Attorney Kratz then says, well, as asked, then, Judge, it is irrelevant and should be inadmissible. If we direct it more towards testimonial, that is, if he wants to get into, would you do something to help your buddy, Jim Lenk, today in testifying, I think that's appropriate, but that should be made clear. And if we're getting into more than that, that is, as Mr. Strang, using his words, I have your back, if we're talking about back in November of 2005, their previous friendship may, in fact, be relevant and all those kinds of things, but not what happened in the 2006 election. Attorney Strang then says, let's bring us back to the actual line of questioning, because I don't know that we need to slice the salami that thin. What I'm doing now is simply following up on and exploring his claim that he has no idea whether Jim Lenk supported him or not for sheriff. He hopes he did, but if Mr. Lenk did not vote for him, it wouldn't affect by one iota his view of Mr. Lenk. And I'm following that up since he's already acknowledged that he thinks well of Mr. Lenk and has worked with him and known him since 1996. I'm also going to ask him when it is that becoming sheriff popped into his head, since presumably that was some day before the day in May 2006 when he had to file his candidacy papers. And that's really essentially all the farther I'm going with this. And the court says, all right, it seems to me of marginal probative value. But if you are telling me you are almost done, I will let you ask a few more questions and then move on. All right? We can bring the jurors back. And then if the victim/witness coordinator is here, she can bring Mr. Colborn in. Okay, so here's what just went down, because this was a little confusing, right? The jury's not in the room. Colborn is not on the stand. The lawyers are going back and forth about whether or not Strang, Steven's defense attorney, should be allowed to question Colborn about his relationship with Lieutenant Lenk, the same guy he searched the Avery property with, side by side, for days. Strang wants to suggest that Colborn and Lenk were close, not just work buddies, but had each other's backs in lawsuits, depositions, and possibly even this election, right? The sheriff's election. Strang's point is, if these two were tight, and if they were both under fire from Avery's lawsuit, that Colborn might have a reason to bend the truth to protect not only himself, but his partner as well. And Kratz tries to shut it down. He argues that unless Strang can prove that this loyalty existed before November of 2005, then it doesn't matter. Basically, he says it's only relevant if Colborn is trying to cover for Lenk right now on the stand, not if they were pals back then. But Strang fires back, saying, look, I'm not dragging this out. I just want to follow up on what Colborn already said, that he thinks highly of Lenk. He's known him for years and maybe wanted his support when he ran for sheriff. And that kind of relationship could impact his credibility. The judge says it's marginally relevant, but agrees to let Strang ask just a few more questions before they bring the jury and Colborn, the witness, back in. And then the jury comes back, the witness comes back, and the court says you may be seated, and Mr. Strang, you may resume your questioning. Attorney Strang then says thank you, and he continues his questioning. So the question was, Sergeant Colborn, in the months leading up to this election, are you telling this jury that there wasn't any time when Lieutenant Lenk approached you and told you either that he was in your corner or couldn't support you? For sure? No, I'm not saying that. Well, what did he tell you about whether he was supporting you? We did not have, I tried my hardest not to have any discussions about the election at work because I didn't want it to distract from work. Privately, Lieutenant Lenk gave me every indication that he was supporting me. Privately, you took him to be in your corner? Yes. You may want to get just a little bit closer to the mic. The mic is sort of touchy. When was it that you began to think seriously about running for sheriff yourself? January or February of 2006? Had the idea occurred to you back in 2005? I can't recall specifically. I may have thought about it, but at least by January or February 2006, you had a building sense that maybe I could do the top job in this department? Yes, sir. Maybe I could do some things a little bit differently than I see them being done? Yes, sir. Maybe I could bring something important to the job of sheriff and serve the citizens of Manitowoc County? Yes, sir. By May, that idea had become strong enough to cause you to go through all the steps necessary to declare a candidacy? Yes, sir. You had not run for an elected office before? Actually, yes, I had. Okay, at a countywide level? Yes, all right. So at least that process you were familiar with and willing to undergo again? Yes. Knocking on doors, speaking at Lions Club dinners, that kind of thing? Yes, sir. Now it was, I think, October 13th, 2005, in specific, in which your deposition was taken in Mr. Avery's lawsuit? Yes, sir. Was this the first time you had ever had your deposition taken? Yes, sir. New experience for you? Yes. You were not so much asked to attend a deposition as you were the recipient of a subpoena to do so? I believe so, yes, sir. That deposition process involved being sworn, same oath you took today, essentially? Yes, sir. But in a conference room or library of a lawyer's office? Yes, sir. You were questioned by Mr. Avery's lawyers at that deposition? Yes, sir. You sat across the table from Mr. Avery himself that day, October 13th, 2005? I know Mr. Avery was in the room. No, it wasn't like I was directly across from him. No, he was down at the end of the table. Yeah, and I didn't mean directly across, but the two of you shared this conference room and the table? Yes, sir. Along with other people? Yes, sir. Court reporter? Yes, sir. Various lawyers? Yes, sir. Some of the questions concerned a telephone call that you had taken? Yes. You understood the call, which today you can place only as 1994 or 1995? That's correct, sir. You understood the call to be coming from someone who was a detective? Yes, sir. Detective with a law enforcement agency? Yes. In an adjoining or nearby county? I believe so, yes, sir. You don't remember the details today? No, I don't, sir. And indeed, on October 13th, 2005, you didn't remember many of the details either? No, sir. But the gist of it was, we have got somebody here in custody who we think maybe did an assault in Manitowoc County. That was part of it? Yes, sir. And we further think that you may have someone in jail for the assault? That was the gist of the phone conversation. Yes. Right. And I understand you don't remember the exact words, but that was the gist? Yes, sir. Now, as a corrections officer in the jail, this was not directly your responsibility. No, sir. You passed or tried to pass the call to the detective unit? Yes, sir. But you understood that you were being told by a law enforcement officer that Manitowoc County may have someone locked up who didn't commit the crime for which he was imprisoned. That much you understood? Yes, sir. Was that a matter to shrug off for you? I didn't shrug it off, sir. I did what the caller asked me to do, connect him to a detective. I think actually you suggested that perhaps the caller should talk to a detective. No, he specifically asked for a detective. How he happened to call the jail and get to you, you have no idea? No, I don't, sir. Lieutenant Lenk, you were aware, also was deposed, had his deposition taken in this same lawsuit? Yes, sir. This was a federal lawsuit? I don't even know enough about it to know whose jurisdiction it was. Okay, I know there was a lawsuit. All right. Do you know if it was down in Milwaukee? The deposition? My deposition? Or the lawsuit? Either one. My deposition was in the city of Manitowoc. I don't know where the lawsuit. I don't know. Fair enough. But you did have an opportunity to talk to Lieutenant Link about the fact that he too was having his deposition taken. I don't recall discussing the deposition portion of it with Lieutenant Link. What did you discuss about the civil lawsuit with Lieutenant Link? The court says, "Excuse me, counsel, are you referring to some time before the deposition or after?" I'm referring to the time immediately before the deposition, after you would have gotten your subpoena. Okay. Yes, I knew that Lieutenant Link had a subpoena for the same deposition that I did. Yes. Okay. And I'm not interested in the content of your conversation, which probably would be hearsay. But the two of you established that one another had subpoenas for depositions in that lawsuit? Yes, sir. And again, without going into the content, shortly after your depositions were taken, the two of you talked about the fact that your depositions had been taken. Not really, not beyond the fact of, did you go on the day that you were supposed to? Yes. And that was pretty much it. Okay, fair enough. Did you have any concern that you would be added as a defendant in that lawsuit? I don't know if concern is the correct word. I know I expressed that I didn't have any knowledge of that case. I wasn't a Manitowoc County resident at that time. My question, though, was whether you had concern. The thought crossed your mind that you might be added as a defendant in that civil lawsuit? Yes, the thought crossed my mind that I might be added as the defendant. You had never been the defendant in a lawsuit before? Not that I recall, no. Do you think you would recall? I would think, but this isn't something you were relishing? No. How do you think having been a defendant in Mr. Avery's lawsuit for his wrongful conviction would have affected your prospects in the race for sheriff? Attorney Kratz says, "Objection, speculation." Attorney Strang then continues, "Did you consider that?" And the court says, "Just a second. I'm going to sustain the objection." Attorney Strang then continues, "Did you consider the prospect of an effect on your race for sheriff if you were added to that lawsuit?" No, I didn't, sir. Okay, so let's pause here for a second, because why does this even matter if Colborn was listed as a defendant? Stephen Avery had a multi-million-dollar civil lawsuit going against Manitowoc County for his wrongful conviction in 1985, a conviction that cost him 18 years of his life. And that lawsuit didn't just name the sheriff's department. It had the potential to name individual officers, including Sergeant Colborn. If Colborn was officially listed as a defendant in that lawsuit, it could have meant a few serious things for him. Personal liability. Even though the county might cover the costs, being named could still put his career, his reputation, and his financial future at risk. He was planning to run for sheriff, and being sued by the guy the county wrongly imprisoned would not look good on a campaign flyer. And if he thought that being tied to Avery's case could damage him, he might have had a reason to minimize his role, to stay quiet, or even cover for a partner like Lenk. So when Strang asks him, "Were you concerned about being named?" and Colborn says, "Yeah, the thought crossed my mind," that's huge because it speaks to possible bias. If you're sitting on the witness stand and you're worried about your name being dragged through a lawsuit or being connected to a massive screw-up, your testimony could be shaped by that. And the lawyers are basically saying, hey, jury, don't just listen to what Colborn says. Look at what he had to lose if Avery won. I would like to shift off the lawsuit and talk to you about reports, police reports, for a little bit. And I promised you that we were going to get back to the Recruit Academy, and we will. Reports are something that police officers, and by that I mean broadly, sheriff's deputies, municipal police officers, special agents of the Division of Criminal Investigation, just law enforcement officers generally. All right? Reports are something that is common to the work of policemen. Is that a question? It is. Yes, reports are common to policing. And that is one of the things you learned to do in the Recruit Academy, was to prepare a report. That's correct, sir. It is a regular routine in policing to prepare reports of your activities as they bear on a criminal investigation. Yes, sir. You were taught in the academy the basics of how to prepare such a report. Yes, sir. Reports have several purposes, I guess. One would be to assure accurate collection of facts. That would be one purpose of a police report. Yes, sir. Another purpose would be to set down on paper your memories before they begin to fade. Yes, sir. A third purpose would be to allow others in the department to benefit from knowing what facts you had learned or steps you had taken in an investigation. That I don't know. Sometimes reports are confidential and no other officers view them. Sometimes, but let's expand on that. In any sort of a larger jurisdiction, let's use Manitowoc County, the Sheriff's Department. Policing is a 24-hour-a-day business. Yes, sir. 365 days a year. Yes, sir. That is, there may be very small towns that have only a part-time police officer, constable, police department. Correct? Yes, sir. But with the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department, it's around the clock, 24/7, 365 days a year. Yes, sir. Obviously, no single officer can work 24 hours, 7 days a week, so you divide the day into shifts. That's correct, sir. A criminal investigation that happens to begin on one shift may be carried over on another. Yes, that's possible. Officers who actually don't work the same shift may be working on the same investigation. Yes, sir. Witnesses may have to be interviewed, and their working hours may require officers who work on the late shift or the overnight shift to conduct the interviews. Correct. So by preparing reports, officers on one shift can share their information with officers on the other shifts? Absolutely. And in this sense, there is a collective benefit that allows the department to continue its criminal investigative duties. Around the clock? Yes, sir. Yet another purpose of police reports is to report upward to supervisors what it is you are doing. Yes, sir. Reports typically are reviewed by supervisors. Yes, they are. For accuracy? Yes. For thoroughness? Yes. For completeness? Yes. Preparing reports is something that a thorough police officer does? Yes. Preparing reports is something that a police officer should do in a timely fashion. True? Yes. Because, again, one of the first purposes is to get the facts down on paper accurately while they are fresh in your mind. Yes, sir. And preparing reports in a timely and thorough way is something that a fair police officer does, isn't it? I would imagine, yes, sir. That is, you want the report to be objective? Yes. Accurate in the sense of fair and factually correct? Yes. Not tilted or biased in any fashion? Correct. The idea is to lay out the facts and see where they lead? Yes, sir. You prepare reports then, and as they go up on the stream for a supervisor's review, the supervisor typically will sign off or indicate approval in some fashion. Yes, sir. Or may send the report back for further work. Yes, sir. You are a supervisor yourself in the road patrol unit. Yes, sir. You fill this function. And that's one of your administrative duties, is to review reports prepared by deputies under you in the road patrol unit. Yes, sir. You encourage them to file timely reports. Yes. Thorough reports. Yes. And fair reports. Yes, sir. The reports, after now 10, going on 11 years as a sworn law enforcement officer, then sometimes will go further to a prosecutor. Yes, sir. Prosecutors rely on those police reports in making charging decisions. Yes, sir. If they elect to charge a case, you know as well in your criminal justice system that the reports then go to the defense once a case has been charged in court. Yes, sir. The defense lawyers then rely on the thoroughness of those reports. Yes, sir. The accuracy of those reports. Yes, sir. The timeliness of those reports. Yes, sir. And at a very practical level, if later you, as the officer involved in some activity, have forgotten exactly what happened, you can turn back to your report. Yes. Use it to refresh your recollection. Yes, sir. Sometimes use the report of other officers to refresh your recollection. Yes, sir. Which again is you relying on the accuracy and the thoroughness and the timeliness of reports by other officers. Yes, sir. And if you were to change your explanation of what happened, either the prosecution or the defense might use the report to show that you had said something different in the report. Yes, sir. If you don't prepare a report, then you haven't committed anything to paper. Correct? Correct. And someone who doesn't commit anything to paper then can't be pinned down on the details as would someone who had put the details on paper. Okay. I mean, that makes sense. Makes sense to you? Mm-hmm. Now, let's go to this investigation. The activities concerning this investigation. Are you with me? Yes, sir. November 3rd, 2005, when you learned from Mr. Wiegert that Teresa Halbach was missing, was just about exactly, to the day, 3 weeks after your deposition in Steven Avery's lawsuit? Yes, sir. You were the shift commander that day, as we have established. Yes, sir. You learned about Miss Halbach being missing at about what time? Somewhere between 6:30 and 7:30. You were scheduled to get off shift at 8? Yes, sir. Nearing the end of your day? Yes, sir. As shift commander, you could have assigned anyone in road patrol to go out to the address on Avery Road? Yes. You chose to do it yourself? Yes. Did you go alone? Yes, I did. At that time, all you knew is that this address on Avery Road was one of the appointments that Miss Halbach evidently had the day she was last seen by family or friends? Yes, sir. You happened to meet Steve Avery, or not meet him for the first time, but run into him, so to speak, when you went out there that evening? Yes, sir. You talked with him? Yes, I did. He was very cordial? Yes, he was. And as you followed through, you saw events unfold. Eventually, it was Steven Avery who was charged with killing Teresa Halbach? Yes, sir. And that came a week, roughly, after your first conversation with him on Thursday, November 3rd? Yes, sir. Mr. Avery was then charged with the most serious crime someone can commit in this state? Yes, sir. When, sir, did you first make a written report of anything having to do with the November 3rd, 2005 meeting with Mr. Avery? June of '06, I believe. Does June 29th, 2006 sound correct? Yes. A few days short of the 4th of July? Yes, sir. Not quite 8 months after the conversation with Mr. Avery? Yes, sir. Was that a timely report? I wasn't even aware that Manitowoc County had our own report. I didn't find out about it till then. You were aware that Manitowoc County Sheriff's deputies had played a substantial role at the Avery property for a week, from November 5th to November 12th? Yes. You saw literally dozens of fellow officers from the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department during that week? Yes. And your testimony today is you aren't aware that any of them ever wrote any report? No, I wasn't. I knew Calumet County Sheriff's Department was handling the report portion of it. And somebody finally suggested to you in June, more than 7 months later, that maybe you ought to write a report about that first interview with Steven Avery. They informed me that there was indeed a report and that I should make an entry on it. Yes. You made an entry on it? Yes, I did. And that entry was all of about a page. I guess it was a few paragraphs. I don't know how many. Did you happen to notice when you were with Mr. Avery on November 3rd, a big fresh gash or cut on his right middle finger? No, I did not notice that. Didn't notice him bleeding? No, sir, I didn't. Or notice anything that looked like it had been recently bleeding or recently a fresh open cut? No, sir, I didn't notice any injury. That's why there is no mention of such an injury in your report. True? Correct. Attorney Strang then says, what time does the court wish to take the afternoon break for my purposes, Your Honor? And the court says, we'll go another 10 minutes. Attorney Strang says, thank you. And then he continues. Now, did I understand you correctly in your testimony earlier today, Sergeant Colborn, that today you remember what it is you were doing on your day off, Friday, November 4th, 2005, the day after you first talked to Steven Avery? Yes. We were talking about timely and thorough and accurate reports before, and I wonder if you recall, a little over a month ago, not quite 6 weeks ago, in fact, January 11th, 2007, being interviewed by Investigator Steyer of the Calumet County Sheriff's Department. Do you remember that? Yes. And you knew that Investigator Steyer was interviewing you in connection with this case? Yes. You know, as a law enforcement officer, that it's important, if one speaks to another, to a police officer, to give accurate information to the officer. Yes, sir. You know, in fact, that it's a crime in the state of Wisconsin intentionally to give false information to a police officer? Yes, sir. And on January 11th, 2007, you recall Investigator Steyer asking you if you could recall what you had done on Friday, November 4th, 2005, your day off. Do you recall him asking you that? Yes. And what you told him was that you could not recall what you had done on your day off. That's what you told Investigator Steyer? Yes, at that precise second that he asked me, I could not recall everything that I had done on that day. You recalled later? Yes. And when, sir, when did you call up Investigator Steyer and say, I'm sorry, I was wrong. I now remember what I did on my day off, Friday, November 4th, 2005. I didn't call Investigator Steyer. One of the things the road patrol officers under your supervision frequently do is look for cars that appear out of place. Yes, sir. Or if they made a traffic stop, they will inquire about the license plate or the registration plates on an automobile. Yes, sir. And they will call into dispatch and give the dispatcher the license plate number of a car they have stopped or a car that looks out of place for some reason. Correct? Yes, sir. And the dispatcher, very quickly these days with his or her computer screen, can get information about who, to whom, A license plate is registered? Yes, sir. Also, the dispatcher can give you, right over the phone or the radio, the information about what car the license plate is registered to? Yes, sir. This is useful so that you know who you may be approaching. If there's a driver of the car that's stopped? Yes, sir. It's also useful to know whether the license plate appears to be on the car for which it is registered? Yes, sir. If the car is abandoned or there's nobody in the car, the registration tells you who the owner presumably is. Yes, sir. Are you the only Andy, to your knowledge, in the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department? The only officer with the first name, Andy? Yes. No, I'm not. All right. I'm going to ask you to listen, if you would, to a short phone call. And I will ask you first if you are the Andy speaking. All right? Mm-hmm. Attorney Kratz then says, Judge, before counsel does this, could we have it identified as to the date and time? Attorney Strang says, absolutely. I will do the best I can. In fact, I should mark it. So exhibit number 212 is then marked for identification. Attorney Strang then says, this is a CD-ROM that we obtained from or a copy of the CD-ROM that we obtained from the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department, exhibit 212, counsel. Thank you. For counsel's benefit, this will be track 3. All I'm told by the Sheriff's Department is that these are calls between November 3rd and November 12th, 2005. Attorney Kratz says, Judge, we don't know when. What he is about to play them is within a 9-day period. Attorney Strang says, if the witness made the call, I'm going to ask him when he made the call. And the court says, all right, go ahead.
Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department, this is Lynn.
Lynn.
Hi, Andy.
Can you run Sam William Henry 582? See if he comes back to that.
Sam William Henry 582.
Attorney Strang then says, let me just stop it right there. In fact, I'm going to go back because it was so soft at the beginning. And then he plays it again.
Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department, this is Lynn.
Lynn.
Hi, Andy.
And then Attorney Strang says, is that you? It sounds like me. I believe it's me. Okay, and then he continues.
Can you run Sam William Henry 582? See if he comes back to that.
Sam William Henry 582. I need telephone, please. Alrighty. Do you speak any Spanish there, Andy? I'm just going to call on the top of the list since mine on-call didn't call me back. And when I get in trouble, Andy, I get in trouble. You know? What am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
My favorite one is in the city of Manitowoc. Yes. Okay, it shows that she's a missing person, and it lists to Teresa Halbach.
Okay.
Okay, that's what you're looking for, Andy?
99 Toyota.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
You're so welcome. Bye-bye.
And then the questioning continues. Okay, that's the entire call. Hangs up. That's your voice? Yes, I believe that's my voice. Yes. When did you make that phone call inquiring about a license plate? I don't know. Do you have any recollection of making that phone call? It would have had to have been 11/3/05, or I'm guessing 11/3/05. Okay, but let's establish this first. Do you remember making that call? Not really, no. What you're asking the dispatcher, whose name is Lynn, is to run a plate that's Sam William Henry 582. Did I hear that correctly? Yes, sir. Sam William Henry is a phonetic code that law enforcement officers use because sometimes it's hard to tell just a letter over radio. Yes, sir. Sam William Henry would be SWH 582. Yes. This license plate? Yes, sir. I'm showing for the benefit of the record, this is either exhibit 152 or 153. The clerk says it's on the plate itself, and Attorney Strang says this one happens to be 153. Attorney Strang then continues. And the dispatcher tells you that the plate comes back to a missing person or woman? Yes, sir. Teresa Halbach mispronounces the last name, but you recognize the name? Yes, sir. And then you tell the dispatcher, oh, 99 Toyota? No, I thought she told me that. And then he plays the tape again.
Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department, this is Lynn.
Lynn,
Hi, Andy.
can you run Sam William Henry 582? See if he comes back to that.
Sam William Henry 582. I need tower one, please. Alrighty. Do you speak any Spanish there, Andy? I'm just going to call on the top of the list. It's mine on call. Didn't call me back. And when I get in trouble, Andy, I get in trouble. You know? What am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
My favorite one is in the city of Manitowoc. Yes. Okay, it shows that she's a missing person, and it lists to Teresa Halbach.
Okay.
Okay, that's what you're looking for, Andy?
99 Toyota.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
You're so welcome. Bye-bye.
Actually, you who suggests this is a 99 Toyota. I asked if it was a 99 Toyota. Yes. And the dispatcher confirmed that. Yes. Were you looking at these plates when you called them in? No, sir. And your best guess is that you called them in on November 3rd, 2005? Yes, probably after I received a phone call from Investigator Wiegert letting me know that there was a missing person. Investigator Wiegert, did he give you the license plate number for Teresa Halbach when he called you? I don't remember the entire content of our conversation, but obviously he must have, because I was asking the dispatcher to run the plate for me. Did you not trust that Investigator Wiegert got that number right? That's just the way I would have done it. It's not a trust or distrust issue. Attorney Strang and then says, I'm about to move to a different area, Your Honor. And the court says, all right, we'll take our afternoon break at this time. And then at this point, the afternoon break is taken. And on that very suspenseful moment, we too are going to take a break. This is running really long. And I will be back right away as soon as I possibly can with the rest of Colburn's cross-examination. And I'm sure there's going to be a redirect in there somewhere. You just got to be sure of it. Okay, so let's go over what we just heard, kind of the short version, okay? In this episode, Sergeant Andrew Colborn, he's on the stand. He's still answering questions under oath. And, honestly, it's a lot of I don't recall, I don't know, and these vague non-answers that leave more questions, really. We learned that Colborn and Lenk, his partner during these searches on the Avery property, both knew that they were being deposed in Steven Avery's lawsuit. And Colborn admits that he was at least aware that he could be named as a defendant in that suit. Why does that matter? Because if you're under the microscope in a $36 million wrongful conviction case and you're trying to climb the ranks in law enforcement, maybe even run for sheriff, that's a lot of pressure. Pressure enough to make someone do something they normally wouldn't do? We'll see. And the whole call to dispatch about the license plates. We're not done with this yet, but I'm sure that something really interesting is coming down the line about this phone call. On a similar note, don't you wonder how the police department doesn't have the timestamp or date on this recording? That Colborn had to be asked about it. Maybe the defense knows something about this and we just don't know this yet, and we haven't gotten there. Up to this point, Strang's whole point in this line of questioning was to show that Colborn might not be the most neutral or objective witness here. That maybe his testimony is being shaped by what he stands to lose or what he needs to protect. And let's be real. When someone testifies with that much to lose, it's fair to question how much they're really telling you and what they're leaving out. I'll be back soon with the rest of Colburn's testimony. Until then, thank you for listening, If you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, it's super easy. Just hit that subscribe button below, and we'll talk again soon. Bye for now.